Welcome Nate for his talk, Hidden in Plain Sight, How Adversaries Hide Their Malicious Content Online.
Oh, computer went to sleep. Log back in. And start my timer so I know how fast I'm going, which is going to be very fast. Okay. Good. Perfect. So, like he said, I will be doing Hidden in Plain Sight, How Adversaries Hide Their Malicious Content Online. But I have a lot to talk about, so I'm just going to get right into it. Malicious content just exists on the internet. We see this in the news all the time. The Oregon DMV was the victim of a data breach, and we learned that this was the case on June 1st of this year. And for those of you curious, it was CVE 2023-35708 that was responsible for this. It was a SQL injection vulnerability, but we're not going to specifically be talking about that here. We also hear other news stories, such as former employee of technology company arrested for stealing confidential information, or website shut down for hosting gigabytes of illicit imagery. And so this content can take the shape of personal information, malicious programs, illicit imagery, etc. So this begs the question, how are adversaries hosting their content online, and how are they not getting caught? And this presentation will focus on the adversarial use case of selling their malicious content. But before I get into that, I do need to define some terms because I'm going to be using these in a non-standard way. An adversary is one who is engaged in hosting, searching for, or is attempting to communicate with other adversaries for the purposes of obtaining malicious content. Malicious content is computer malware, others' personal information, illicit imagery, content relating to harming others, or is otherwise illegal to communicate, obtain, or have. And a malicious website is a website that contains malicious content. Then that's it. So now that I'm done sounding like a dictionary, we can actually get into the meat of this thing. So one of the things that adversaries can do is advertise their content. And it does seem kind of strange to us at first glance. Hey! Yeah. Yes, now how do I shut you up? All right. I'm sure I'm going to hear another one of those in like 2 minutes. It's going to be great. So why would an adversary advertise content they have for sale? Because that seems like something they wouldn't do because this content is illegal after all. Well, adversaries advertise for the same reason that normal companies do. If nobody knows it exists, well then how can anybody buy it? And so this advertising is not likely to use, mainstream advertising like, Google Ads or stuff, but there is still an advertising component to this. And this advertising is done discreetly and in places where other adversaries are likely to look. And I don't have too much time to focus on it, but the IWF ICAP was a thing that they released, and it was basically the premise of certain malicious websites will gate certain content behind either payment or getting other users to join the site via an invite link that's unique to each person. There it is again. And so the premise is that, so you see one of these random invite links on the internet, you click on the link, you like the site or whatever it's supposed to be, you then get your own invite link and you send it out to more people and so on and so forth. It just creates this positive feedback loop that sort of resembles a pyramid scheme in a way, although if we're being generous, we could call it a word of mouth or a guerrilla marketing campaign. So now we're going to go look into social networks very briefly because that also plays a role in this type of stuff. So as we know, Facebook, Twitter, X, whatever they're going by these days, are very large social media platforms with large content moderation teams. And for adversaries, it's really only a matter of time before this content is found and removed. But the trade-off is large visibility and reach, but it's much more easy to get caught. True Social also exists, I guess. I bring this up because I'm going to show you a chart on the next slide illustrating that no social media platform is safe from malicious content and its removal. So even though True Social and Mastodon are not necessarily on the next chart, they still have the same problems that many of these others do. And I also want to bring up Mastodon, even though I don't really have time to talk about it, because I submit that it is likely the platform of choice for most adversaries for the purposes of buying, selling, and advertising malicious content. And it is likely in some form of an unfederated invite-only instance. So this chart shows the social media and content account removals for child abuse and safety from 2018 to Q3 of 2022. Content for removal includes comments, posts, messages, images, etc. Though this number does vary slightly depending on what the platform is in this data. This chart can also be found by scanning the QR code there, or if you downloaded these slides from the OCRS website, the yellow links in this presentation are hyperlinks. So what I want to draw your attention to is this top red line. We'll see if I can hit it with this thing here. Yeah, there we go. That one right there. That is YouTube. And YouTube had 873 million removals in the beginning of 2020, 856 million in 2021, 310 million in 2022. So no social media app is exempt from this. Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Discord, they're all on here. And one of the most surprising things to me when I found this chart is that LinkedIn is on here. Like, when you think of people, adversaries, like, oh, I'm going to host malicious content, all this stuff, I'm going to put it on LinkedIn? What? Yeah, okay. So that was the thing that was surprising to me. So what can we do about this? Well, unfortunately, really the best thing that we can do about it is just using the built-in reporting features to report the malicious content as we see it. And depending on the nature of the content, a cyber tip to the appropriate organization might also be appropriate as well. And adversaries will typically use the fake accounts for the purposes of scamming, spamming, and also posting malicious content on these websites. So we need to develop better tools and technology in order to combat this. And it's up to the companies to use these tools and technologies that researchers have developed. There's no sort of academic research based on fake accounts. Here are just two of them that I found with a simple Google Scholar search. I'm not saying they're any good, I didn't really read them, but here's just two as an example. So there's a lot of research out here. But it's also possible that there's some secret sauce that these social media companies have that's better for detecting fake accounts than what academia is doing. I don't know, I'm not in that space. One other thing that I think we could probably look into is the use of IP banning for especially malicious users who just abuse their site. But that doesn't necessarily help in a lot of cases, especially because a really technically savvy adversary will just change their IP anyway, and also the way the internet exists and works and DHCP, so that's really not a great solution, but it is one that we could potentially implement in some cases. So now that we've very briefly looked at social media, I want to very briefly focus on communication, because adversaries who wish to purchase content need a way to communicate with one another. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. So encrypted telecommunications apps helps ensure that these messages cannot be sniffed out adversary in the middle style, like I talked last time I was here. And these apps, some of these apps offer self-deleting messages, and you can really see how appealing that is to an adversary. But the big thing with this is the certain degree of trust that is required. If an adversary wants to communicate with another adversary using these apps, they have to trust that the person on the other end isn't their friendly neighborhood FBI agent. Yeah. They also have to be able to find other adversaries as well. And the way that they would do this is by advertising, quote, their contact information via social media or some other website, sort of like I talked about in the last section. And Tor also bears a mention in this presentation as well, and this seemed like the best place to put it, sort of, I guess. So, and it seems fairly obvious to us at first glance that Tor would be an amazing use case for adversaries to use. But the thing about Tor is that different studies say different things with regard to Tor and how it's used and how much of it is malicious. And it really depends on the study and when it was done. And this number can range between 1 and 80% of Tor traffic being malicious or not. So I think it's safe to say that the only thing we are 100% certain of is how much we do not know how much of Tor traffic is malicious and services and how much of it is not. But one interesting thing I will mention is from the study from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, where they found this correlation between malicious Tor use in free countries as opposed to the more repressed ones. And effectively what they found is that Tor use in the freer countries tended to be more malicious than the more repressed ones. However, this number only varied between about 2 to 4% or so. That being said, don't get me wrong, Tor is still absolutely used for malicious content hosting and adversarial activities. The Internet Watch Foundation, or the IWF, identified 1,067 new hidden services, or websites that are only accessible through the Tor network in 2022. Tor is also used to host botnets, including Skynet. I'll just leave that name there for those implications. The way that we combat this is with the use of network or content patterning is sort of one way we can do this. And this is simply identifying the pattern of known malicious content, whether this be at the network level or of the content itself. And it really just depends on what the content is and for which one of these methods apply. I mean, these are some examples of what law enforcement can do. In addition, they can also infiltrate the malicious hidden service in order to bring it offline as well. That was a very fast look at communication. Now we're going to very briefly look at Usenets. So Usenets and torrents are similar, but there are some differences, and for sake of time, I don't really have time to talk about torrents. I mean, I don't really think it's that stretch to say that we all know that torrents are used for downloading copyrighted material and computer malware, so I think I can just skip that. But I also have to skip the Fight Club reference on this slide for sake of time. Sorry about that. So put simply, a Usenet is the precursor to modern web forums as we know and use today. A newsgroup is similar to a mailing list where the topic of discussion is a newsgroup. However, they have a better structure than a simple mass email chain. It enables threaded discussions as well. So while the overall topic of discussion in this picture here is comp.infosystems.gemini, any discussion relating to information systems can be discussed here as well. So this example is discussing a pingback script. So Usenet uses NNTP, or Network News Transfer Protocol, in order to transmit data between the client and the server. And it also has server-to-server communication, and it uses a process called replication for it. And basically what this is when a user posts to a newsgroup, the NNTP server closest to that user replicates that post across the other NNTP servers that it is connected to. And then someone else on the other end of the world or state or whatever, they then have to download the file from their NNTP server and they would see the updated post. And this is sort of how Usenet works in general. So this being the case, how much copyrighted content is on Usenet? Well, Perfect 10, an adult entertainment magazine, no, I am not making this up, it is fascinating, they claim that Usenet provider Giganews offered 25,000 terabytes of copyrighted materials, and this is a direct quote from the Ninth Circuit's conclusion in 2017. In fact, this case is really fascinating to look up. I highly recommend it. It involves like Google and thumbnail images and is actually an interesting case. But anyway, Perfect 10 lost this case, but not because of this claim. Their lawsuit has some other problems we don't have time to talk about. But so, if this claim is true, this is an absolutely staggering amount of content. But even if it's not, let's look at something else. Well, the Internet Watch Foundation found 17 newsgroups on them that had malicious content posted to them in 2022. So it's absolutely being used for some sort of malicious hosting of some kind. So what can we sort of do about this? Well, law enforcement can work with Usenet providers in order to find and shut down newsgroups with malicious content on them, as well as the users who posted it. Even members of newsgroups can help with this as well, if you happen to be one. Basically, you should report content to the provider or indexer in most cases, especially since they would much appreciate handling content regarding copyright, rather than getting hit with a DCMA. But that said, using a DCMA is also an option as well. Members can also use the anonymous cyber tip lines provided by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, or the Internet Watch Foundation, IWF, to report content of this nature as well. So that was very fast, but now we get into the fun stuff. We're going to look at the clear web and see what use cases for adversaries are here. And we're going to start with one of these techniques called top-level domain hopping. And I'm just going to read this description from the IWF because it does a good example of summing up what this issue is. Top-level domain hopping is when a site, such as badsite.ru, keeps its second-level domain name, badsite, but changes its top-level domain, .ru. It creates a whole new website with different hosting details, but retaining its name brand, so to speak. So from badsite.ru, the additional sites badsite.ga, .ml, or .tk could be created. This allows instances of a website to persist online after the original has been taken down, while keeping the website recognizable and easy to find. And this is similar to the legitimate practice of registrar hopping. And what that is a company will change their internet hosting registrar in order to save money. That's a legitimate thing some companies do. And that's fine. But adversaries don't use it for that use case. They use it for the use case of when their website gets taken offline, they can get back up and running quickly. So in order to combat this, registrars or law enforcement should take down the second-level name, bad site from the previous slide, instead of just the top-level domain. But one problem with doing this is if the adversary is impersonating a website or is hosting content on a legitimate web server, that could be taken down instead. So one thing that I think we could probably do well is to do some targeted monitoring of sorts, where it's reasonable to do so. So if we examine this chart, in order of the most abused top-level domains for this technique, we start with .ru right there. And that's Russia's country's domain name, so that one's not really feasible for us to monitor. There's a lot of websites that would use that domain. So we would need something sophisticated to do that, along with .com, which is further down on the chart. However, we might be able to feasibly implement something fairly easily with .online, .top, .xyz, .online. I'm not really familiar with very many websites that use those top-level domains that are legitimate, but I'm just not familiar with them, but they probably could still exist. One thing that the IWF has proposed is a second-level domain block list of sorts. Basically what happens is registrars who get this list, they can check it against the websites that they host, and if they're on it, then they can be denied access to their service, especially if someone new is coming on. However, the problem with this list is that it is opt-in, and so registrars would need to get access to it. And one of the most common techniques is to simply get somebody else to host the content for you, whether this be through hacking a real website or just using something like an image hosting provider. And it seems strange, but yes, this actually does happen. And I picked a case from 2013 for a specific reason, which I will get into in just a second. So in 2013, the IWF received 392 reports of personal or small business websites being hacked for the purposes of distributing malicious content. This content was stored in orphan folders, so normal use of the site would not show what the content was stored or even that it was even there. So, but the interesting thing about this case and why I picked it is that the adversaries took a chaotic neutral approach to this. So users who found and downloaded this malicious content also downloaded a remote access Trojan or a rat. Congratulations, you done played yourself. I just think that's so funny. Anyway. But what is common, however, is using an image hosting provider to store illicit imagery. So the chart shown here indicates the top 10 site types where malicious content was reported to the IWF. And so image hosting sites had a staggering 195,000 reports in 2022. That said, some of these might be double counted, but anyway. The main benefit to adversaries is for when their website gets taken offline. Because simply when you take a website offline, that doesn't delete the images that are stored there. So then the adversary just gets a new website up and running, and it's almost like playing a giant game of whack-a-mole. You know, you take one down, it pops back up. You take one down, you pass back up. But the thing, though, is if you can remove these images from where it's stored, the image hosting provider in this case, then you take it down from every other single place it is linked. And that is really the best way to make a difference in this scenario. It's almost like setting off a stick of dynamite in these gopher holes, so to speak. So this leads us to an interesting question regarding the role of website hosting providers. What is their role in all of this? Well, there was a study published in 2013, and they studied website hosting providers' responses to many security events. Security researchers set up similar websites across 22 different hosting providers. Some were regional and some were local to them. And so the things that they attempted were, they attempted a SQL injection, web shell, uploading a phishing kit. They uploaded no malicious files that they verified by uploading to VirusTotal first. And they also tested suspicious network activity via an IRC bot. So basically, they were hacking into their own websites in order to see and engage like what the hosting provider would do, if anything. And also at a certain point in their experiment, these people studying this contacted these hosting providers in order to see like if they would respond to responses of abuse notifications and if they would do anything. So many, but not all of these testing providers used verification as a means to ward off malicious use. And that kind of works, but that's also not good enough in my opinion. But the theory being is that if I'm going to be doing something malicious, I'm not going to want to give out some personal contact information that can be linked back to me. So there is that theory, but that's not really good enough alone because there are ways around that. So now let's get into the reason and why this study was so interesting to me. So basically, only one provider notified the client that their website was being hacked into, but they had to be notified first. One regional provider, after being notified, took action without even notifying their client. They deleted every single file on that web server, including the clean ones. Not great. And to make matters more startling, 21 out of the 22 tested providers either did not run an antivirus scan monthly, or they were using an invalid signature set for said scan. They were not able to detect the malicious files that were uploaded. And that is just not acceptable. Running an antivirus scan is one of the simplest things that we can do in order to help prevent the spread of malware and other bad activities, etc. And one last thing I'm just kind of leave on the table because I'm not really sure what it says one way or another. There's the alarm again. is none of these providers considered multiple outgoing connection attempts to an IRC server suspicious. I don't really know what that says, but that's a thing. So this made me ask the question, why is it this way? Well, there was a security researcher at Malwarebytes that looked into this as well, and they tended to look at this from more of a takedown aspect, and they also asked individuals in industry as well what their experience was. And they sort of came to the conclusion that we're two different camps of website hosting providers. You have those that don't care where the money comes from, and they just don't cooperate with basically anybody except their local law enforcement, no security research or anything. And then you have those that do cooperate, they actively seek feedback, and they take abuse allegations very seriously, and they do cooperate with security researchers. And so one of the things that he recommended, and I sort of share in this recommendation as well, is that people who are hosting a website or are looking to host a website, they should look into their hosting provider's responses to abuse notifications. If they have a bad reputation, then do not host with them. This puts financial pressure on them to do and be better. Because let's face it, legislation addressing this would be great and amazing too, but that will take forever to do anything. But this is one thing that we can all do now if we happen to be wanting to host a website that would make a much faster event. One of the more sophisticated techniques that adversaries can use is digital pathways, and we'll examine a very limited version of this in the demo in a bit. Basically, the idea behind a digital pathway is to show malicious content only to users who follow a specific predetermined path to it. So if a normal user can simply go to the malicious web server, they only may see pictures of cats, for example. Yes, my demo involves lots of cats. And however, if the adversary, they know this exists, so they go to a different website first, they click a link on it, and that goes to another site, and then they click a link there, and it goes to another site, and so on and so forth, until they're eventually greeted with the malicious content they were trying to find. And this does exist. The IWF has found 5,255 sites that were found using this countermeasure in 2022. So how common is this? Well, IWF has been monitoring this since 2011, so I spent some time sifting through the yearly IWF report in order to create this chart. Note that this chart does not show the years 2011 to 2014 because, frankly, the data was not interesting, and there was also no data for 2012 or 2014 for some reason. And to be clear, I'm not 100% sure what happened in 2021 to lead to that substantial figure of, 26,000 change. So one of the things I thought could potentially contribute to this is the COVID lockdown. I don't know if that's the case, but that's sort of what I think is most likely to that. The IWF has attributed it to better practices and procedures in tech, and I think that is likely the best reason to see that huge uptick. So this is a technology that is being used by adversaries, and this is something that we need to do something about. And it also seems logical that adversaries are going to use some form of content obfuscation in order to change the content that's found. However, that's not supported by the study from Edinburgh University. One of the studies that they examined found that about 7% of content was encrypted until the inclusion of default encryption, and only about 1% in 2006 used steganography to hide their content. One criticism I will bring up with this study with regard to what we're specifically talking about here is that the study was looking specifically at individuals who had been apprehended by law enforcement. So this may change the actual numbers between what we see there and what is actually available in the wild today. So that being said, I simply think that just changing the content dynamically based on some criteria, such as a geolocation or an obscure token, is likely the way to go about it. And this obscure token is sort of my conspiracy theory about this, if you will, and it's the thing that we're going to be focusing on for the rest of this presentation. So an obscure token is simply some piece of information that is hard to guess, but is necessary in order for revealing the hidden content. And you might be thinking, isn't this just a key of some kind? Well, I mean, yes and no. It could be an explicit key, like using SHA or like whatever, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. In any case, the code really boils down to really simple: if user has obscure token, show the bad stuff. If they don't, then show them the good stuff. So how do adversaries potentially use this? So the 5 ways that adversaries could potentially do this, and there's probably many more, is you can use a session token, friendly refer links, and friendly intermediaries. Those last two most closely resemble the digital pathways thing that we'll examine here in a second. Cookies, session tokens, logging into a different website, though that one's known and kind of obvious, so we can just kind of skip past that one. And there's pros and cons to sort of all these methods, and instead of going through all of them and spending another 45 minutes on this, I'm instead going to leave it to you to think about. And also the code that I use for this is available at the QR code at the end. And really quickly, I use DNS mask and Nginx for reverse proxy because I didn't want to look at localhost :8000 the entire time while developing this. Jinja templates and Python 3 Flask for the front and the back end, and Docker make for convenient purposes only. So now we get to the fun part, live demo. All right, so welcome to my cat blog. We have select cats in the nav bar to see some cute cats. So let's go ahead and do that. Oh, look at this cat. Look at this cat, he's so cute. Oh, that cat. Oh, look at that cat. Oh, this cat's grumpy. Oh, look at that cat. Well, what if I told you this was not a blog about cats? I hope that's not surprising given what I've been talking about all this time. But this is a web server that is hosting malicious content. So in order to find it, you have to go to EvilBlog. And here we have nothing but a picture of Mr. Burns looking very snappy. So this website may be disguised or it may be just fine. So I'm going to come down here to the friendly A tag refer, and this is going to be the one I'm going to focus on for now. So when I click this link, it's going to send me back to the cat blog, but this website is friendly. So now I see content for sale. This is fine. Content for sale. People's personal information. Content for sale. All this stuff. This is not a blog about cats. This is hosting illicit content, but we don't know that underneath the surface. So now you might be thinking, great, let's report this to the FBI. Surely they can do something about that. Well, no. So let's say I copy this link. I send an email to my local FBI office, and they are likely to paste it in. So they do that, and when they do, all they see is cats. Yeah, and the thing about this is that you can't necessarily determine that this is the case because you don't have an endpoint. If you have an endpoint, you can potentially brute force this, but if you don't, it's not computable in order to be able to find. And that's kind of terrifying to think about. So one other thing that you can do is you can use friendly intermediaries, and this is sort of like one of those intermediate servers in the digital paths example. And this and if it's configured to be a link hub, then you can see links to all of the malicious servers anywhere along this chain. And so I can just click on this cat blog evil edition, and now I can see this malicious content. But you have to be lucky enough to find this. And sort of the last thing I'll do for sort of sake of time, because I'm quickly running out, is that let's say I want to use this for some sort of a spear phishing campaign. Let's say I know the CEO of a Fortune 500 company loves cats, so I craft my cat blog. I legitimately advertise using Google Ads or whatever, and everyone's like, oh yeah, it's just a blog about cats, that's great. Then I somehow craft a obscure token that fits only the CEO. It might be geolocation, IP address, fingerprint, something. And then I send him this link, and like everybody, it's a mass email campaign. And it takes me to a totally safe link. When I click this, I am going to see, mwahaha, you have been pwned with these leaks, hacksaw, and now all your base are belong to us. Anyway. I think you get the point of it. Anyway. Go ahead and skip to the drive-by download. So that last one was an example of a drive-by download. I can't resist rickrolling people. It's so fun. Basically, it's just a file that's downloaded automatically without your knowledge or consent. And to protect yourself against it, traffic filtering if you're a network administrator, and keeping your browser and your computer up to date. But this demo is simply an example about using dynamic content for illicit purposes, so we need to have a discussion about it. So if we looked at dynamic content with regard to the news, if we take some news story but present opposing views to it using the same link, can we morally do that? What if it was the Chinese Communist Party and the non-CCP approved version? What if it was a Republican versus Democrat format? Dewey defeats Truman. What if this type of stuff has existed back then? So this is the kind of stuff about dynamic content we need to be talking about even outside of its adversarial use case. And did I find any example of this being used to address the big elephant in the room? No, I did not, because honestly I didn't want to find it. But that also was a job for the FBI, and it's also not to say that this doesn't exist in some form or other. So really quickly, when I looked into this, I wanted to focus on the metrics in order to understand why each method was appealing to the adversary. And so the methods I choose were reachability, detectability, security. And basically the adversarial's goal is to have a high score in reachability and security, but a low score in detectability. And basically, I also want to mention this score is arbitrary and is not based on any sort of math and statistics. So in conclusion, the best methods that adversaries can use in terms of reachability is a large social network, followed closely by a website with uses an obscure token, but I'm probably biased in this. Encrypted telecommunications offer a unique trade-off because if both parties are adversarial, then there's not a lot that can be done. But it lacks the reachability that the other methods do. In terms of security, it really depends. No method is leagues ahead of any other, and one thing you learn pretty quickly in security is that no app or service is without its flaws, some of which just have yet to be discovered or have yet to be implemented. And while Tor is an appealing use case with a security of 8, its reachability is kind of lackluster, and that kind of makes it less appealing. And for using it specifically, its biggest strength is really only security through obscurity. And the biggest thing I want to convey with this presentation is that malicious content on the internet is a problem that we can solve and mitigate. However, it takes looking at the many different methods that these adversaries use for this. There is no one-step solution. We need to think outside the box and come up with creative solutions to these problems. We need to be having discussions about dynamic content and how it can potentially be abused as well. We need to create software and systems in such a way for the opportunity to be abused is not there. So we can also hold hosting providers accountable for allowing malicious content to be hosted with them and doing nothing to fix it. And the thing is that if we don't really do anything, then this content might not even be hidden in plain sight. It may as well not even well be. it might well just be out in the open for everybody to see and use and exploit for whatever purpose they want. But that's it for me. Sources.